It takes a minute for it to get to where it's going. Okay, Kenya said she's joining now. So good evening to all of you, and thank you always for coming back, for joining us again, however many times you've been here with us. Thank you to those of you who are joining for the very first time. We're excited to have you. I'll introduce myself as Monica Walker, joined here by my colleague, my friend, my co-conspirator, Dina Hayes, and we too represent the Black Pearl Society Incorporated. We are an organization of African-American women here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina, who have and Washington, D.C., who've intentionally made a decision that in our everyday lives, in what we do, our professions, in our personal lives, in our church lives, in our organizational lives, that we are committed to keeping the topic of race on the table. That is who we are as Black Pearls. I invite you, for those of you that would like to know more, that you can find us www.blackpearlsociety.org on the internet. And also we are partnered with the Racial Equity Institute. Many of you know that Dina is one of the co-founders of the Racial Equity Institute. She is a co-founder with Suzanne Plissick, an organization that is doing anti-racist work and organizing across the United States. I will say this much that is very important. I say it at the top of every episode, and that is, we decided when we found ourselves with time due to the pandemic and stay-at-home order early in March, we said, well, maybe we can do the thing we wanted to do and never got to do. And that is to begin to talk about the organizing that people are doing across the United States to address racism. In many of the places that we do our work, people are always asking, what do you do? What are people doing? What are the kinds of organizing efforts that are going on? We don't always have time to really talk about that. So this initiative was an investment, an opportunity to come to you weekly, sharing with people really what they've been doing across the United States. We have school systems that have organized, taking on the anti-racist work and the stance. We have churches, we have community organizations, we have institutions, public and private, we have corporations. And so this is an opportunity to share that. Some of you were a part of the conversation. We have been trying to deliver in every capacity that we can. We've had whites talking about how they got involved, why they're committed to the work of racial equity and racial justice. We've had an Asian conversation. We're scheduling a conversation with Native Americans. And so with all of that said, tonight is part 2 of a very fascinating conversation. And that is, Dina and I are the elderly tonight, talking with the millennials. And our conversation is, we have found that, in experiences of organizing and addressing the issues, that there's often been kind of a disconnect, meaning that ways in which young people are approaching the work of organizing as contrasted to the ways in which we old people, I never thought I'd say that about myself, are also trying to do this work. But with that said, I want to open up the conversation. I want Dina, if you will, to jump in and pick up where I've left off and begin to talk about. And we have other of our panelists who will be joining us momentarily.
Thank you, Monica. Again, I'm Dina. So glad to be here with our panelists and be here with our attendees, the people who have taken the time to Zoom in and listen to this conversation. I think about it all the time because it's something I want to figure out, if it's something to be figured out, if it's something to be worked out, if it's something that just organically is going to, sort of, I don't want to say self-correct, but, just kind of fuse and move forward. And I've been thinking about, one of our principles in the anti-racism work is that we learn from history and we value history. And as I think about, where we are today, it's easy to think about the movement from the place you entered it And then it seems like that's when it started for you. But I think about, because, you know, especially because Brother Terrence, affectionately, internationally known as TC, I met TC when he was in college. You know, he's a part of the Black History Club at A&T. He was in college. I think you were like a teenager when I met you, Terrence. And, you know, we were organizing with Irvin Brisbane. We were organizing around the 1,000 Black Man March. Remember the march we were doing that was going to get us ready before the Million
And I
Man
just looked at a picture today.
So we were organizing for 1,000 Black Man March right here in Greensboro. And so I've been with Terrence since then. And as you know, Mama Nettie Code, you know, started grooming me and putting me on the board of the Old Ashboro Street Neighborhood Association. And then, you know, that led to the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative and the Partnership Project. Well, it led to the Partnership Project. Then the Partnership Project led to the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative. And I was chair of the board of the Partnership Project. It was the nonprofit organization here in Greensboro that was organizing for Undoing Racism workshops put on by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. So I'm going through this history, and each of the board members with the Partnership Project were asked to recommend someone for the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative, and TC was my appointee. And TC has been a part of a groundbreaking, life-saving, systemic approach in healthcare. So I've just seen the evolution of this multi-generational partnership and movement in a really productive, profound way. And I don't know why it feels different now. I don't know if it's just like, well, that was then, that's how y'all did it then. You know, now, you know, it's just like there's a new sheriff in town. We don't do it that way anymore. I don't know what it is, Lamar, you know? And so it gives me a little heartburn. I'm okay with change, but sometimes it hurts more than it feels like a difference, you know? So TC, I don't know if you wanted to say something first about, you know, our little path forward. And Lamar, you know, you can come in and talk about, you know, how you see this relationship, how you see this movement, how you see this timeline.
It might be great to have them. You kind of reintroduce yourself, if you will, too. TC, you're joining us the first time. Thank you, Dina.
Yeah, so tonight I'm TC, a young activist, and I say that intentionally. I've been an activist for almost 30 years. I would say 29, started in 1991. And I definitely say I'm young because I have elders, and I want to also talk on that point about elders. So there's people that's still been around, that are still around, that was here when I started. So I always call myself a young activist because the history and the legacy that they still carry, that they still work on, I'm nowhere near the amount of work and legacy and history that they have. So I'm young in it, even though I may have 29 years in this work. So tonight I'm an activist. You know, as Dina said, I am also the chair of the Greensboro Health Disparities Collaborative, the co-chair with Carrie Thatcher. I'm also part of the Hip Hop Caucus, the community outreach manager. I mean, I do a lot of stuff with the radio station and the community, the Beloved Community Center. But tonight, my role is just a brother who is in many spaces locally and nationally. And actually internationally, I've traveled, we work with people in different communities. But I want to start my conversation with laughter because one, let me first say that I may not be here for the whole time. I do a blog talk later on tonight, but I wanted to really engage in this conversation. I went back and watched last week. I watched about an hour of the conversation. I was just laughing and laughing and laughing. And as it was funny, it was very necessary. It's very powerful. And as we were briefly mentioning at the beginning of the show or before we went on air, is that this is a conversation that literally is going on across the nation. This is not a Greensboro conversation. This is a national conversation a lot of people are having. So let me go back to go through a couple of my notes right quick to kind of preference what my conversation will be tonight. Last week, I love that y'all started off laughing. Why? Because the conversation, I don't know how it ended, but at least we started with laughter and joy because it's a very, very serious conversation. I also like that there was a conversation. There was a conversation about reclaiming Black communities. There was a show a couple of weeks ago about buying in the neighborhood and building a sense of community. And I say that is because the reality, we keep talking about community, 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 but that is a real word that we got to really delve into tonight, because we don't have communities. We have homes and apartments where people live, but it's not community. Like when our elders talked about in the 60s and 70s, when people were actually forced to live. We couldn't go on the other side. So we was forced to have to deal with Black people on one side. We was forced, and which was a good thing, to buy from Black and have Black teachers. So we knew everyone in our community, but we have lost that sense of quote unquote community. So when y'all bought homes, it wasn't just buying homes in the same area, but it was also buying homes and relating to one another in the same area. So you had dinner together, you broke bread together, you build a relationship. So when you all talked about building Black communities, let's understand that it wasn't just about buying a home, it was actually establishing a community. That's very significant, because we always say community, but that doesn't mean that we're in community with one another. And that is a very key point in this conversation. The other thing is, when we talked about being invited to the table, man, that ain't no new story. I remember, now I'm talking about Dr. Ben Chavis, who was at the National African American Leadership Summit, and the young people was there, and they gave us an opportunity to be there, but they didn't want us there. We protested in that meeting, and we got on national TV. Ed Gordon had to interview the college students and the young people. We were going to make it known. We shut down North Carolina A&T's campus. We took over the chancellor's house. We took over the administration building. So I say that in the sense of, we never asked for that place. We got a place, and then we also built our own table. We built our own representation. So not being invited to the table is nothing new. They have always stopped everybody from being at the table, and that is on all sides, from our internal and external forces that stopped us. Also, when we look at this thing about organizing, we're going to talk about that tonight. We have to organize. There's no excuse about anything that we don't want or want to do. We have to be focused, determined, and get together and organize and pull the things together that we want to see as that change. As the cliche saying, quote unquote, we are the change we want to see, or be the change that you want to be, or see however that thing is. And that's a reality. And as I wrap this up,
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to take a breath. I was going to.
Yeah, I was, because I just had to get these notes out. But the difference is, there's a social media, so everybody's seeing everybody. Everybody is, they're conscious on social media. They can let everybody know I'm conscious. But back in the day, you had to read a book. We had to know if you conscious. We had to know if you knew something. We had to see you. We had to see some product, and we didn't have the ability to see a social media to see what you was doing. We actually you had to go door to door. You had to bring folks out to make that reality. But we can get many, many likes to show, and that doesn't really show. And Monica, on the closing point, is that when we talked about last week, you said something about, well, what elders are you talking about? What millennials are you talking about? That's a real profound question, because we've always had Negroes. We always had gatekeepers in position that were older, but they weren't my elders. And this is what I mean by my elders. My elders are somebody I have a relationship with, that I take guidance from, I take leadership from, that we are in community. We have conversation that I learn from. So if I do something wrong based off the order in which we're in community, they have the right to check me. So when you are coming into a community, certain communities have laws, orders that we adhere to, and if you break it, you may be out of that culture. So when we talk about this whole thing about it was the call out culture, that was what we was known for. Going to a city council meeting, going to a school board meeting, and call out people, because one of the things we had to do is do a power analysis. And this is the thing from Steve Coakley. He said, we talking about, well, it's white people that's doing this. White people, what white person? Which white person? Which organization? So once we did an analysis and found out who the problem was, then we can call them out and point them out and expose them for what they are doing or not doing. So that kind of conversation and thing has been going on since I started in the 90s. And that's why I say I'm a baby, because I started in 91. This was going on in the 80s, 70s, and the 60s, and going on back. But a lot of the conversation that we haven't has been going on. So my thing tonight, I just wanted to talk about what happened last week, but it's about how do we get past the ills that our enemy has us against one another and get some solutions and move forward. because I didn't got time to have arguments. I'll pray for you, but then we got to get back to work because we have a real enemy that's really killing us. And I ain't got time to have a lot of conversation about why you don't like me or I ain't dressed right or my hair wasn't right. Look, I cut my hair tomorrow and I look cuter tomorrow, but we got some work to do to help our people. I just had to get all that out.
Yeah. And I just want to say, you say you're a baby. We got some big babies in this Zoom room tonight, okay?
Oh, but I don't claim to be a millennial. I know
I
my
got you,
age,
TC. I
but a
got you.
baby in the struggle.
Lamar, you're next. And April has arrived. They don't roll without her. Lamar?
I'm Lamar Gibson. I work at Democracy North Carolina. I'm from Greensboro originally. I've gotten to be mentored and grow with the other folks on this call. I came into this work as a young organizer at the Beloved Community Center originally, and where TC was and Reverend Nelson Joyce Johnson, and for a while entered the world of partisan politics, and I am now back in the world of nonpartisan politics. So we're having a ball. I hope everybody has a plan for voting between now and the next 19 days. And I'll pass it to April.
What was the prompt? Just telling us
Who
about
are you?
ourselves?
Oh, just
Who am-
reintroduce yourself.
Who
We
are
want
you?
people tonight, right? Yes, please.
Hi, April Parker, pronoun she and her. I always tell folks I'm not from the South, I'm of the South. But my folks have made their lineage from New Jersey to North Carolina many generations. So I've been here for about a decade, being one of the angelic troublemakers here locally in Greensboro. I did a lot of work in the LGBTQ community at the intersections of race. And I'm a mom, I'm a twin, I'm a librarian, but I hope to be of some service to the community. And I'm originally one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter Gate City.
Thank you. Thank you, April. Kenya?
Hi, I'm Kenya Donaldson, and I think the prompt is tell a little bit about how we're here. I think I started with organizing around education and trying to bring a voice for educators. But in that exploration, I started to see some of the impacts that our politics and the cultural divide, the disproportionate representation of Black and Brown peoples in our community and leadership. And it sort of shifted and threw me into the area of organizing around the Black community. And so I sort of wear two roles. I wear two hats. I speak on behalf of teachers, but I also speak on behalf of my community, a little bit more vocally than some people are comfortable with, but we roll with it and we do it. We figure out the way that we can make this happen. And as many of us have spoken of, we disagree, we come back together and we move forward on one accord for the better of everybody that's involved and the people that we represent and advocate for.
Excellent. How do you want to dive into this conversation tonight, Dina Hayes Green? We are muted, Dina.
Oh, shoot. I said, shoot. So what unresolved issues did we have from last week? You know, because, you know, there still are some. We talked about a lot of things. And then I also, before we end this session today, want to talk about what are some recommendations, ideas, agreement, rules of engagement, that would help us, sort of strengthen and continue to maintain our momentum given our approaches. So one, what have you thought about, any of you, what have you thought about since last week? What's happened since we were together that felt unresolved, that you've thought about, that you might have a different question or idea about? Because, I think about this. I wonder if I think about it too much, if I should just let it be and, just let things again you know, I don't want to say fix itself. Maybe it's not broken. Maybe it's just a natural thing that we're going through, and continue to do, you know, the work in the way that I can do it, and just figure out how to, you know, how to navigate this together. So if anybody has any thoughts about, if you've had any thoughts since we talked last about this, and what you would have wanted to say then, this is that opportunity. Lamar, you look like you're perched to say something.
Yeah. So one thing that I thought about leaving last week's conversation is that we, and TC pointed this out, like this all is happening in a national context and an ongoing context. And so there are communities like ours in North Carolina, Greensboro, Guilford County, like that are grappling with these questions of like tactics and strategies. And one thing that I've been sitting on since last week was kind of along the thread of a conversation April and I were having around kind of what are the basic understandings people have when they're organizing together, what are these basic agreements, and what are the tools and things you can have in place to strengthen, you know, our corner of the movement, like for the work we have to do together, like what makes us strong enough for that, while always keeping the focus on what we're actually fighting against. And how do we not get lost in our intergroup dynamics? How do we honor and respect each other enough so that we can carry the work forward? So that's what's on my mind. Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, Lamar, that's sounds like what I've been thinking about. April, Kenya?
And one of the things I guess I walked away with is that, and just in my work, even throughout the week with some of our organizations around the work we're doing in the community, is that we allow our tactics to divide us as opposed to allow those tactics to be strengths in unity. And I just wonder, what can we do to bridge and connect those tactics and those strategies, because it seems that we all have the same goal. And I don't know where that conversation lies and where it begins and how we bring those pieces of the puzzles together. But I think, like you said, Dina, it is a point where we all think maybe we should just walk away and do it on our own. But we know, we continue to know and recognize that there's strength in unity. So how do we do that? How do we go about bringing all of those pieces together such that that wisdom that people bring to the table matches that energy and tenacity and passion that brings all of that together around that same common goal? I just don't know if we figured that out or taken the time to do that as a community.
Yeah, thanks, Kenya. I think that us talking about that is a step in that direction. April?
Yeah, I agree. Hey, y'all, it's really nice to see everybody and share space again. I'm just thinking when you all came up, what came up for me is that, I was just thinking about when you're in these years and your own personal evolution. And so I think that I was owning a lot of things that I might have done differently last time. And I really appreciated that reflection and the opportunity to kind of do it publicly, because, it's a process, you know what I'm saying? And I think that sometimes people don't get to experience and see that process. But I also I was just thinking about most recently, it's like, how do I also affirm that and what's beyond eldership, which is ancestors, you know what I'm saying? And I'm just thinking about, like, sometimes you have to be unapologetic in, like, I'm exactly what I need to be right now at this given moment. And I don't know, I just kind of want to be like, okay, so we're all being guided by those who came before us as well. And so there's like a conflict of like what messaging we get beyond the moment. I don't know. I kind of wanted to feel that you can bring yourself, your full self into a space. And even if it's something that might not, that feels really confusing to people right then and there, you're exactly what you need to be in that moment and kind of being an affirmation. So I was thinking about that, but I was also just thinking what Lamar was saying specifically was trauma informed communication, trauma informed. We are all traumatized folks. And so I don't know if we have the tools and the resources, we don't have the healers necessarily, so when things happen, who's the mediator, you know what I'm saying? Or who's the mental health practitioner? Who are our go-tos? And so instead of just assuming, because we're all talking different languages, because perception and experience and trauma and things of that nature, I think that we're doing a disservice to ourselves. You know what I'm saying? Like it feels like it's a lot of hard work that we don't have the tools with, and we're getting frustrated with each other, but it's like we're not going to always understand where each other's coming from and what can be in place to kind of ease us into that. And I think that we just assume that we should get it because you're my kindred, and like, oh, we've been sitting at the same meeting for the past 6 months every Monday. Of course you're like me and I'm like you, but that's not true. We have our own triggers, we have our own traumas, we have our own things that we bring into the space. So I've been thinking about how even in our most intellectual, badass, strategical planning, there also has to be things that are in place for the inevitable. And I think that we have been negligent as a people, you know what I'm saying, when it comes to how we are making commitments to each other, with being toolless, So I think we need that intention. So I was just giving some thought towards that. Hope that makes sense.
I want to say something that's going to throw me in some really hot water, and I don't care right now because I'm really trying to, I do. April, I want to understand some stuff because Dina and I were having a conversation the other day because almost everything you touch and you read and you look at in the last year or two, maybe the last 3 or 4 years, it's like this trauma word has taken prominence in our community. I don't deny trauma. I absolutely do not. But I also know that most of my elders went through more trauma than I could ever imagine myself going through. And trauma wasn't a word, it wasn't operationalized, and it wasn't something they had to fall back on. That in spite of the traumas that they experienced, they still had to organize, wake up every morning, roll back out of that bed and deal with the enemy of their survival, deal with the circumstances. And I'm a little bit concerned and worried now because every time there's some fallout, the word trauma starts to get kind of inserted into conversation. So I maybe that's a good place to start for us as a collective of people in this community to start talking about what the hell is our trauma when we're trying to do the work that we have to do. You're smiling, Lamar, so maybe you want to jump in first. Help me, somebody.
Oh, I will. Go ahead, Mark.
I wanted to say something. I think it's a trigger for me. That's all I'll say, because you went right where I was going, Monica, because it is a trigger for me because, everybody knows I keep a picture of Harriet Tubman behind me. I tell all my colleagues at REI, I said, you can be sleepy, but you can't be tired, and it doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves, but, self-care and the way that trauma is brought up. Some people are like, we talk about, we talk about, we look at data, we look at studies, we find out some research, and it's like, oh, that's traumatizing. And it's like, I get that, and I also know that information, people died so we would have that information to say, this isn't about our broken families and our bad parenting and our lack of financial literacy. This is about systemic racism. So it's actually the opposite of traumatizing for me. It's empowering to say, oh, dang, I thought this was just about, because what I heard is that we like cars and jewelry and leather things. It was leather things when I was growing up, sort of pocketbooks that nobody would recognize as being designer these days. But it was just like, that's what I was told. That's why we live in the hood and those kind of things. So I was just like, oh my goodness. So this anti-racism, undoing racism, analysis was so empowering to me. And then when I sit in the workshop today with people, they're like, this is so traumatizing for me to tell my story. And it's just like, well, don't tell it then. Take care of yourself and don't tell it until, I mean, I'm serious. And it's a way also that white people get to make victims. There's some paternalism in that for me.
Mm.
Like, this is traumatizing for Black people. And then I don't know. So I feel some kind of way about it. I like Monica, lift it up. You know, anybody needs some soup, a shelter for a little while, caring. Let's take care of each other because that's what we used to do. And let's not spin in that. You know, so that's the old lady's perspective on it. So we'll be glad to open it up to have some conversation about it. Maybe there should be two old ladies and a.
Oh, no, we gonna
And
talk
four
about
babies.
it.
That's what TC said, babies. I'm messing with you, TC. Talk to us about trauma, because I need to understand, because I'm hearing it so much more from the generation that follows. Help me out.
I will just jump in really quickly to say, when I heard April talking about trauma, I think about, I'll personalize it. So I grew up in a family that said you can be whoever you want to be, you can do whatever you want to do, so long as you do these few things, and I think, and this may speak to a generational thing. My grandparents know what it's like to not be allowed in the store on the basis of their skin color. Like, my aunts and uncles are old enough to know, and it's crazy to me every time I think that there are people that are alive that I know who went to newly integrated schools, that were bused. And so there is something about seeing the progress, the generation of African Americans, in the affirmative action period made. And so it's when the bootstraps argument was hottest, you do your thing, you get the reward. I think that my generation has grown up and seen kind of the fullness of the lie. It's we've grown up, and so Monica, when you talked about, things being worse for other people, one thing, I thought, worse is kind of relative. To grow up and be told, if you check the boxes, you get the thing, but you encounter these walls and these things that don't necessarily look like the dogs and the hoses, but there is the wall, there's the block, there's the barrier. And so I think what I was hearing when April talked about trauma is approaching each other with the assumption that we've all been shaped by some experiences that could have broken us. And we're fighting through brokenness, all of us. We're showing up and we're fighting through brokenness. We're broken and we're trying to be whole. And it is acknowledging the cracks, the hits, the bruises everybody has taken. And some of us show up, something that's traumatizing for some people is having to tell the story over and over again of the things that they've endured. People not, having people not being treated as fully human, people not being treated, with, the care that they need. And so when I hear April talking about trauma and the trauma that we re-experience, it's, it's almost the assumption of resiliency, that people experience. And it's I need you to show up battle ready. And it's no, but most of us are showing up broken, and not broken and hopeless. But I'll stop right there and let somebody else pick up. Yeah.
So I just wanted to jump in here, and I'm not necessarily going to speak and try to translate what April said, because I want her to translate her own words for herself. I will say this, that there's a language that wasn't used, but it's the same context. The same context we use with the History Club and those in community. And then let me be very clear. We can't use all of these analogies and these formats on just Black folks. So when we're in the struggle, if we're not in real community, not like we was at the same meeting, that don't mean nothing. If we're not eating, we're not engaging, we're not talking on a regular, and I'm like on a regular day in and day out to really deal with one another, then we're really not in community. A lot of folks of us say, well, that's the conscious community. I don't know what you're doing when we don't leave each other. No, I can't consider that community. And I'm saying that is because when I was coming up, and I think everybody came up in a certain way, what you do privately affects what you do institutionally and in this movement. So we was like, you know, like some brothers and sisters like, man, yo, what you doing is not, you know, yo, that's gonna affect us in the work. Or you drinking all the time, you smoking all the time. And okay, if you drinking and smoking, that's your business. But when you come to the meeting drunk and not coherent, now we gotta check you on what you're doing, because now it's spilling over and it's not in order. So I think when we talk about the issue of trauma, it's the reality of like all of us need to really take care of that. And I think we have come to a point where we are talking about self-care a lot more because of because a lot of social media, a lot of stuff, because we wasn't always going to conferences talking about self-care. But it's the language now. So a lot of people are taking more, but I don't think we never took care of that, because we all like, well, what you eating? And we'll all go eat together. We'll break bread together. Or the brothers play basketball together. Because I don't know what the sister did for the sisters, but they do whatever they did with the sisters. But it was a process of making sure you took care of yourself in this work. But I do understand the Monica and Dina side is that, yes, we're suffering, but that suffering doesn't mean that we stop. Now, that does mean that you take care of whatever you need to take care of. It's almost like if you're at a conference, they said at a conference, everybody, you know how to raise your hand, go to the restroom. If you need to take care of yourself, go take care of yourself and come back to the conference. And I just think that we need to have spaces for people to be able to do that, but somebody need to raise their hand and let us know what you're getting ready to go do. Some of them just check out, but some of them check out because we pass out because we be in this work so long that we don't understand about burnout. Like one of the things for me being in this work, when I see a new person come into the struggle and come into the movement, I smile. And I smile in a sense when I see they going off and we gonna do this and y'all ain't doing nothing. And you know, I'm like, okay, that's nice. I put my timer on. I give them 2 months, give them 6 months, give them 2 years to calm all that energy down, to learn how all of this works. Because none of this is going to happen just because you're yelling and screaming overnight that everything's going to change. It's going to be a process. And then once you start learning the process, you'll mellow out and figure out where you fit into the bigger picture. And you'll find out where your placement is and your role and your responsibility. But a lot of folks come in here running, and because of where we are with social media, everybody's saying, so I want to do this and I want to do that, I want to do that. And most of the folks that did that, you can watch their timeline and see where they are now. And you can see what they're doing now, and you can start seeing their shaping of a mind. And I think the reality while we're having this conversation, we're just seeing a lot more people's actions and mindsets because it's all out there on social media. Versus you just couldn't run and do whatever you want in the community without checking in with some organization or some group. Because if you was out there by yourself, we're like, what that person know? We don't know that person. You had to be over our house. We had to see you because there was no way of knowing who you were on social media. If we didn't know you in these spaces, we'll check you because we have no record from social media to know who you are. But right now, you can be whatever you say you are on social media. You can make up whoever you want to be. But I think this issue that April is saying is that a lot of people are now being aware that they are suffering from stuff.
Okay, could I do one thing though, TC? I don't want to locate the word trauma to just what April said, because that's not really also where I'm coming from. But perhaps since April said it, trauma is showing up in everything everybody's talking about. We got people, even to talk about the problems of racism that we're dealing with. You know, people want to say, well, I'm traumatized even talking about it. Well, you know, therapeutically, my experience has been in this country that, you know, when you talk about reevaluation therapy, when you talk about the different modalities of therapy, part of trying to heal was, you know, one of my significant religious leaders in New York often said, the way out is back through. You can't heal not talking about the problem that you're suffering.
Right.
That's the trauma I'm speaking of, because people are saying now, trying to talk about, to deal with and to push back against racism is trauma. I'm not minimizing, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm not saying that could be traumatic. The problem is that if that's all you can say is that it's traumatic, and then you sit outside and not engage this struggle that all of us need to be engaged in, that concerns me. That we can't even push back on the thing that we say is killing us. That you have that level of trauma that, you know, because they say the traumatic mother, when a car flips over on her child, she lifts the car. That's what I want to say. And that helped me with that. So April.
In other words, it's traumatic to deal with it, but if you don't deal with it, you ain't gonna get healed. So we just stop.
You're gonna die.
Yeah, but we gotta push through.
Well, I think that it might be a differentiation between who the audience is, right? Like if I am around folks that are going to support me through the process versus trauma porn being something underneath the white gaze, I think that's a little different. So there's a difference to me, depending on who.
So you might need to explain that, April. Trauma porn under the white gaze?
Trauma porn, which is like, I can tell you 11 ways that Black folks are dying right now. You know, we see Black folks being murdered in the streets, and that's why folks are saying Black Lives Matter. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to care. You know what I'm saying? So I can tell you all the ways in which my people are resisting and how there's just the plight of the poor Black person. And Greensboro kind of, particularly, and the progressives love that narrative. You know what I'm saying? In regards to how we are dying and how much care, and let's go ahead and throw nonprofits and charity work out these folks because, you know, the poor Black folks. But in reality, it's by very function, you know, that these things exist, and they're quite all right with the poor Black, the plight of the poor Black people, because that's the thing that maintains their positionality. And so trauma porn to me is just constantly telling that story for the gaze of white folks, you know what I'm saying, to kind of justify, you know what I'm saying, like I don't have to go. And that was another thing I was thinking about when y'all were talking was you know, I think Lamar is right. Like trauma is relative. Like I'm not gonna say that I dealt with you know, what Harriet Tubman dealt with, but I also want to say how if you have a critical lens and you're cognizant of naming, you know, the boot on your neck, and then you have elders and other folks that are talking about like, well, things have gotten so much better, and millennials are like, where? How? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's still more Black folks in jail than there were, you know, in slavery. And I'm not going to pretend that somehow we have it better because slavery goes now by another name. You know what I'm saying? And so that duality, that is a hard place. Like you're trying to tell me and negate and gaslight our trauma. My lived experience is that we are people under surveillance. We are people that are, you know, hunted, preyed upon, exploited. And I just think that the whole, well, we can go and eat where we want, and we're better off is right. Just fictitious. That's and right. So I think that some of the trauma for me and the is everybody's having a race experience. Everybody doesn't have a race analysis. So when you don't have a race analysis, and that's why Dina was saying like, oh, I feel empowered. It's because you have a race understanding. You have a critical race analysis. We have Black people now that are walking around having this harsh racial experience, but they can internalize it, you know what I'm saying, as like a character flaw. You know what I'm saying? Or something that is inherently wrong with them, you know, as opposed to, no, racism got you down, brother. You know what I'm saying? It's not because you're just not competent. It's because you're being oppressed. And if you can't see, I always say, you know, Black folks know that there's a boot on their neck, and critical race analysis is to determine what size that boot is. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just the awareness, you know?
Mhm.
And so I'm not trying to say that, you know, I am one of Harriet's daughters, but I by no means say that I experienced these same um, uh, injustices. But I can say the person that birthed me was a white woman. And she the first person that I heard the N word came from her. You know what I'm saying? So I had to learn real quick. You know what I'm saying? What anti-blackness was, and if I didn't have a community, you know what I'm saying, or if I didn't look to connect with my Black mom, my mentors, and my elders, I could have been easily forsaken to a life of feeling. You know, with the seeds of white supremacy might have done to me. So yeah, I think that trauma is relative, but I'm not here to bleed out in front of anybody to justify what the data proves. You know what I'm saying?
No,
I was,
that's helpful. Kenya, I felt you trying to say something. And
Yeah.
Dina?
I think
have
it's
something
problematic.
anybody can see it, but it is the minutes from a meeting. It was February 28th, 1996. It was a meeting with Jerry Wiest. Anybody here know who Jerry Wiest was?
Former super.
Yeah, so he was
Yeah,
a
him.
superintendent of Guilford County Schools. So this is February 28th. You know who was at this meeting? Skip Alston, Katie Dorsett, Gladys Robinson, Celestine Hunt, Irvin
Wow.
Whitfield, Lewis Fields, Reverend Fleming, and Dr. Brown, Curtis Brown of the Pulpit Forum. This was 96, 24 years.
Wow.
And the meeting was to be discussed with the superintendent, policies and procedures for handling racial harassment, affirmative action policy, procedures for reporting, documentation review, diversity training for staff, data on the achievement gap, disciplinary action by race.
Wow.
This is
That's like last week's
I got
agenda.
receipts. I got receipts. Okay?
Yeah.
This is from the NAACP. This is Harold Cotton in 1996. You know what he's saying?
Wow, Harold.
He's saying, yeah, Mr. Cotton's passed on. He's saying
Come
that
on, receipts.
he's requesting a meeting with the superintendent to say to discuss the need to strategies to improve the racial attitudes and behavioral practices of those who administer and work within our school system. It's 4 pages here talking about racism from the NAACP. All I'm saying is that some of these people are still here, and some of them have gone on, but they were doing this before we got here. Now they were asking for a diversity office back in 1996. You know when we got one? When did we get one, Monica?
2006, August 1st.
You know who continued the work that they started?
Come on.
So we lobbied we didn't have a diversity office. I got elected in 2002. We didn't have a diversity office. That was an organizing strategy.
Yep.
We could have gotten a diversity officer, but we got an anti-racism organizer that sat in that position. That was an organizing strategy that took years, but it started with them, not me. They laid the groundwork. You know what organizers do? Over time, they create an environment over which change can happen. And so the thing is that I have a whole file here. TC, you're in some of these notes. You know what else is here? It's those African-American boys over at Johnson Street Elementary School, right?
Yep.
I think I said that last week. A white girl said she lost $10. The story told them to go in the bathroom, $2. Teacher, the story
stripped.
said she sent them in the bathroom to empty out their pockets, but they disrobed. So this became the infamous strip search, right?
High Point, North Carolina.
So we're out there picketing, right? Me, Irvin Brisbane, Earl Jones. People out there picketing Jones Street Elementary School against this teacher. And organizations started, and we had meetings at churches and all this other stuff. And so people have been confronting and addressing these issues, the same way that you all are today. And it's not like they didn't get resolved, but what's the plan? See, if y'all gonna just do what we did instead of building on what they did and we did, saying, okay, so what's the plan? Everybody showed up at April, you remember those discipline SRO conference panels, those discussions we had at Penn Griffin, and then we had one at Grimsley. What's the plan? People came and got on the
But
mic.
that was the thing, and that's the whole thing of where, for me and my personal experience, what she's referring to, I think we were trying to have one of the first SRO removal campaigns. It started a year, and it was during the Black Lives Matter uprising, the original ones, and that was why I think it's important that you're bringing that up, is because that's where, to me, some of the breakdown between intergenerational movement building started happening, is because I feel like the young folks were trying to lay the ground to continue on doing some of that work. And then the folks that were in positions of power shot the gun, you know what I'm saying? Like they're, and invited the larger Board of Education to an NAACP meeting before we even got to do the public education work. So because people still thought police keep us safe, you know what I'm saying? And to some extent, people still think the police are there to keep us safe.
Now,
And
these were sponsored by the school system. This isn't the same thing. These were sponsored
no. But then that is what prompted the school system to having those citywide conversations. And we weren't ready.
What was the plan? Where's the plan?
The plan was definitely not to make it a public discourse before we had laid some public education.
Well, if that happened, then we can still regroup, because if the plan is to replace or remove or deal with discipline, whatever it is, we still have to have a plan.
But Ma, that's what I'm saying. We were so shocked. The young folks were so shocked that, I swear to you, I'm just telling my truth. We were shocked that instead of continuing the work and taking longer to do it the right way, some of the old folks who had been doing it were just like, we're going to make it public. And then, and kind of, so I'm just saying that because we didn't hold the line, you know what I'm saying?
But I think there's a disconnect here. Go ahead, King. Let me wait till King.
I just want to say this.
The most consistent voice. You stacked the meeting. The majority of the people that came and presented and commented were people that were favorable to what you were.
Right, and we felt so harmed that by the fact of the matter that something like the progression of something was taken from us. I mean, it was personal. It's just like, and then they distanced themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like when things didn't work out, that's one of the things that I would like to heal by the end of this conversation, is that when things don't go right or things go a little left, for whoever reason, whatever reason, that we don't distance ourselves. You know what I'm saying? You got to rock with me. You know what I'm saying? When it gets a little messy. You know what I'm saying? And y'all have done that.
Right.
Look, I'm looking me on this panel. Somebody screenshot me.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
April, I feel you, because what it is there's an agenda that came out of 1992, 1996. Those are the approved agendas. When we bring an agenda, not only does it have to be vetted, they want to have a full plan. They don't give us that opportunity, not only to vet it ourselves, to develop our plan and lead the effort around that movement, because it wasn't approved by those that have the cultural worth around the organizing. And so it often can be derailed. It can be derailed in one conversation. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of our conversation tonight has been around the identity, the wealth of identity and what we bring to the table, how we define our stories, and what that means when it comes to organizing together. And so, like you said, April, when talking about the SROs, that was not necessarily, it doesn't sound like—
Kenya, let me tell you what happened. Kenya. Folks was at our house, at my house. I made pancakes on Veterans Day.
Oh, goodness.
I'm trying to tell you, this is how personal it gets. You're talking about breaking bread, TC. They was at my house. We had a strategy, and then they took it somewhere else. And then said they had not been working with Black Lives Matter, the NAACP. And we had receipts too, because it was like, check the minutes to the meetings. We're on the agendas. So I just wanted to say, this is all pressing to the real time of how things get kind of messed up. You know what I'm saying? Because it hurts you. You know what I'm saying? How you gonna be at my kitchen table on Tuesday and then acting like you don't know me on Thursday? You know what I'm
I
saying?
think you know how that happens. Don't act like anyway. The thing is that I don't know how people can stop y'all from doing that. I wasn't there having pancakes. I've been at your
I
house.
just want to say I wasn't there either.
All I'm saying is that why do y'all have to stop, regroup, and do it again? What harm did it have? Open it up to the public, because now you got it out there. What's the plan? You don't, Kenya, y'all don't have to have nothing vetted. I mean, you can go and do it yourself. You don't have to check in with none of us. Go.
That's not true. Oh,
Why?
that's
Exactly,
not
April.
true. You telling
Go do it.
You have
So
to roll a dial.
How can I
We're
stop
ready
you?
to move. You know who you need to call to make that move.
Exactly.
So let me say this. You know what? We have given so much power to institution that we forget about the organizing of the people. In other words, what there's a couple of things that happen that we missing. One of the things is that when we go back to the streets and get the people, then we can demand what happens in that boardroom. Part of the conversation that you all are talking about is that you're dealing with the same shifty Negroes that we've always dealt with. Some people come and they have a meeting with you and then they act like they don't know you. The hell, move on. And what I'm saying is we cannot be giving power to folks that ain't down with it. That's why I said define who your elders are. Don't say those are your elders if they're not with you and they're not down with you. If they're not down with you, you saw how they are, you move on and you go organize, get enough. Like get your troops, get your people. Stop giving them all the power, because they are not going to do for us what we can do for ourselves. So we have to go into the community, educate, and galvanize. But here's another thing that did happen. I don't think we forget. What Dina said in 1996, which is very key, Irving Brisbane was that voice in the wilderness, screaming out, yelling consistently. The History Club, yelling, screaming consistently. I would say my personal belief that he didn't just die in 1999. That's my personal belief, and I take that to my grave. I don't just think he died in 99. But after he passed, we, the ones that were with him, started to shut down, and we didn't give that connectivity to the net so that you could have those tools. So what happens now, though, is that a lot of people come into these spaces without doing that history, without doing that research, without sitting around doing the math and know who are the real allies and who. Some folks come in, I don't like what it is, and I'm just going to cause problems. And sometimes you're causing problems with your allies because you haven't done the history to know where they have stand and who they are. You just may see them, well, I don't think you're doing it the way I should. And we haven't given that time. So there's a new culture where we want it now. We gonna blast without kind of understanding the lay of land, what happened, how policy works, or what are these relationships. And sometimes we be like, well, this elder said this, this elder said this. But if you come over here and talk to us that's been sitting in the corner, she ain't doing that with you. She ain't down with you. And there's some people that I'm good friends with, but I know their limitations. I know they ain't gonna say Ungawa Black Power, let's take this over. And then there's some people I just go for resources. And you got to know that. But sometimes we walk in this without an organized. When they just talk about what's the plan, we literally got to come together and say, what is our objective for the next 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, and how are we going to make that happen? And sometimes we give that plan over to the enemy and expect them to give us the answers and the thing to our plans, which will never happen. So I think sometimes we get frustrated because we've been in rooms that we thought what people were down with, but they were never down with us in the first place. They were never down with you. And that's why I say these relationships have to be really built. So now you're at the point that you've been out there, you know who's down with you, who's going to be there with you. How do we continue this? So those that are not here anymore, how do we continue to build? What is it that we're trying to build? And I think sometimes a lot of us like, well, we need to do something in education. We need to do something in economics. And we get divided about where the direction is when we need to be doing all of it, but how can we collectively do that? And some of that breakdown is when we disagree, we just say, well, forget you. I ain't dealing with you because you crazy. I ain't dealing with you because you crazy. I don't deal with folks because I just ain't got time. I'm sitting in front of a computer screen or I'm traveling across the country, but I still check in. Mandina still check in. Other folks, we still check in. We still get resources, and there's always a check-in if you really believe that you're for the people. But you got to know that. And then if you don't know the person, I don't know what's wrong with that person, because that person, it's not always about you doing something different, but we got to understand where your motive, where you come from, because part of the history also, folks show up that we ain't never seen before. And yeah, I'm gonna look at you side. I don't know you. COINTELPRO is real. I ain't never met you. I ain't never seen you. You organize in my community. You in my hood. I don't know you. Do you know Mama Jenkins? Did she see you grow up? No, I don't know you. You got to get a pass to come into the community. So some of that gatekeeping is making sure that you coming in to do good work versus you coming in to do some destruction in an organized effort that's been going on for years, which take for years. But it's a process. And that's why that trauma part, we cause trauma. But I do agree, in going back to that trauma piece, I do agree that other folks use trauma and say, well, we're going to help these folks. So we'll get you a soup kitchen, but we ain't going to do no minimum wage. We ain't going to do no fair housing. We ain't going to stop your oppression. We're just going to help you deal with your oppression a little bit better.
Dina, you're muted.
What-
Trying to say something, but you're muted.
Go ahead, Lamar. I'm going to ask Kenya a question, but go ahead, Lamar. Get ready, Kenya.
No, you ask Kenya first, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I just want Kenya to give me an example of how, what support looks like from, from people you say need to authorize, approve, support a plan. So what does that look
Well,
like? You can give me a scenario, real or hypothetical.
I'll give you real and I'll give you all of it. There
Okay.
are people that are new on the bandwagon who haven't been there and they just don't know how to navigate. Like Terrence said, you're just walking off the street with a concern and you reach out to someone with a concern, we want to get SROs out of the school. As an organizer who has been experienced, being able to connect that person or advise that person on how to navigate, how to get, they may have people that support them, but how to lead those people around that movement. And so it's almost like a mentoring thing, knowing what somebody brings to the table, where they are when they come to the table, and mentoring them in a manner where we can succeed in some of our outcomes that we've identified. And that's a very minor one. Well, it's not minor.
Yeah, I was gonna say, maybe we should use that as an example, because that's gonna get all kind of pushback. But anyway.
Yeah, but
yes.
Can you don't you think mentorship and not manipulation too? Because I think that sometimes I have seen from my experience that people will bypass someone who has been in the community for a while to kind of be able to manipulate the power of somebody who has been most recently activated too. Like, let's just call it what it is. So I really shouted when you said, that there is a check-in because, in the community, you can't just bypass who you want to bypass. You know what I'm saying? You will not get supported. What would I look like? You know what I'm saying? If I didn't honor Beloved Community Center and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you don't want to ask permission to do this divine work to get yourself free to survive. But I do think that there is a way of doing things, because people will organize against you, and we don't even have time for that, because they have a plan that's decades and centuries old. And that's what I wanted to bring back with Dina. And I know, Lamar, you had something to say, but I wanted to offer in the last half hour that I do think that we should collectively be power mapping at this point. You know what I'm saying? Because Dina taught me, there's people that own, the Mendenhalls, the Cones, you know what I'm saying? These are real people, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Like,
they own real stuff.
Yeah, real stuff, real people. And so I have been blessed to be in community with y'all, but how many folks really know that there are lineages to white supremacy in Greensboro, and we have to peel that back because it's really that deep. Like, just don't think you on Mendenhall Street and you don't know the Mendenhalls. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that we should be power mapping, and I want to offer that as one of the next steps.
Well,
and I know you said Lamar. I just want to say the thing about what you just said, as simple as what you just said, if we don't have the plan to put that out, it never gets done. And we just want to say it that way is one of the things that we used to do in the History Club. We used to have a forum every month And it may be the same thing, spirituality, education, but every year new crops of people will come in getting the same thing. So there'll be a same understanding. And I'm very clear about that. And the strategy of the enemy is to let you burn out, move on, graduate, or leave the city so that information does not get passed on.
Oh, but I want to say one thing to that, TC.
Mhm.
We've got to also face sometimes in our efforts when the enemy is us, because you know what?
Yes.
We run more actions than we do plans.
Right.
Let's just say that. Let's own that. Because in
Mhm.
a lot of the work that has happened over the last decade, people are straight to the action,
Right.
but don't sit still long enough for the plan.
That's right.
And the plan can feel debilitating because while you're trying to map it and you're trying to lay it off, you know, there's another thing that's real in the movement, ADHD,
Mhm.
a whole lot of attention deficit when we're trying to get that plan together. And so if we don't own that, and if we don't sit and hunker down, now, April, you know, I mean, we know that we've been at the table a lot, and we've made, I think, significant, legitimate, I think, honest efforts trying to do the plan. But I think that somewhere along the way, oftentimes there's a splinter or division, or somebody can't sit long enough. So the next thing we know, people out there performing actions.
That's right.
I don't want to point at that just in the relationships we have had, April, those of us that have been in communication. I mean, it's like, and then we're very busy people. I can think about Kenya times when you said, hey, Monica, hey, Dina, and it's taken us a long time to get back. We got to own that. So some of us are overburdened with all of the things we're trying to do around the work of organizing. I mean, that's one of, to me, the most legitimate critiques of all is that we are so overwhelmed with all of the things we need to be organizing around that we have had a, you know, I'm gonna call it the failure to launch, you know, like the movie. We've had a failure to launch, a failure to plan in the way that we should. And I apologize, Lamar, for jumping out in front of you.
No. Two themes that like keep emerging for me. And one of the comments in the chat like says I'm in the situation April and Dana were describing, they're wondering how the language around planning was different for folks. And so two things that have stood out to me are this idea April raised of, April, you said the right way of like describe something that's being done. And other folks have talked about timelines. And so one thing that's been clear to me is that there's this sense of urgency that we fall on different we fall in different places on the scale of urgency around certain things. And I'm reminded, I think we were in Highlander, TC, you might have been there, I don't know, Vincent Hardin was talking somewhere. And he said, like, he was telling the story of Thich Nhat Hanh coming to the US, like, and seeing these signs in the 60s of all these anti-Vietnam War protesters saying, end the war now. Stop the war now. Stop the violence now. And Thich Nhat Hanh told these college students, much to their disappointment, like, my country has been occupied by some other country for the last 4,000 years. Like, this concept of now, you know, is not, you're talking about something different. Like it's like we don't appreciate this concept of now. And he said his advice was like, we must learn to struggle with patience. And then he said it again, like, we must learn to struggle with patience. And so there's our external struggle with patience. There's our internal struggle with patience. And I think what we're getting at are these competing priorities. And this is where the unit, the strength of the group, like this is where the attention to how we're taking care of the collective comes in, because one thing, a lot of like my, like, I guess, second round of political formation was in the Occupy movement with a group of people who most of whom, like, well, half of whom I'm good friends with today, half of whom I'm good friends with today, the other half, like, I can't tell you where they are. And like, one thing that process had to have as a part of it was space and room for navigating, like, oh, you said something that was trash, like, and we got to address that here in this moment. We got point of process, like, you know, or we're going to take a time out, you know, for these things because We don't all know each other. We have different things that we're responding to, prioritizing in the moment. And so this process has to have something built into it for us to understand each other better, deepen the relationship, and we have to trust each other in the process enough so that our ideas of the right way and the timeline, you know, respect the realities that we're all dealing with. And so I'm thinking about that. And again, this question of competing priorities, you know, this is like, Dina, are you?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah. I thought you were talking. But yeah, so this question of competing priorities and what we do as a group, as a collective, to balance like these competing priorities, this urgency that people are experiencing, and how we make room to address both, and how we create a shared strategy when we're approaching it from context that we don't share.
Well, I got a message. One of the things in the chat says, a person, thank you for lifting it up, was saying like, I might have had a plan, and then, you know, we're saying that there might not have been a plan. I want to say that there's something hard about consensus. You know what I'm saying? That when we are at the table, we want to say there's so many different strategies that we have to employ, like voting and all this other stuff, and electoral work, right? But we have struggled to find a consensus around things and consent, right? So I'm not gonna ask Monica to shut down a highway with me. You know what I'm saying? Like, what, you know what I'm saying, without a consent, you know what I'm saying? Like, I gotta tell folks, like when I was doing the morning drive, you know, I had to be mindful of bringing folks into the streets, you know, and what is the escalation around the possibility of arrest or unsafety or whatever. And so people have to consent to being a part of the process, and then we have to have consensus around how we move. And I think that that is one of the places and that we can kind of work on, because that's what the chat was saying is just like, yeah, I had a plan. But if the younger folks were down with the plan and the older folks weren't down with the plan, was it really a plan? You know what I'm saying? Now that I'm looking at it years later, you know what I'm saying? Oh, I was so wounded. But it's right. I think that it was like, dust your shoulders off, get over it. But I thought we was going to get free, you know what I'm saying, to the naivete that TC might have lifted up. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're activated and you're doing this work and you come in, you think like, oh, the things that you're doing, you know, we're definitely going to get free. This is it. You know what I'm saying? So there was some naivete that was happening during that time, to where I did become familiar with the ebbs and flows, like you said, TC. You know, you kind of you get to see the process. But I think that if because we are in the last 20 minutes of this, like for instance, during the first uprising, and then I'll be quiet. I wanted to build a Black Power Town Hall roundtable. We've done those before. They haven't been consistent, to Monica's point. You know what I'm saying? But to TC's point around having like the history club, I do think, or Beloved has midday, you know what I'm saying, where people talk about, you know, local politics. But I kind of wanted to do something at night to make things a little bit more accessible for those who worked. And all the organizers around me was like, wait, let's just see, wait, just let's see. And I'm just like, to me, I'm just like, wait, but we need a virtual space so we can come together because COVID, you know what I'm saying? Because we haven't been able to share physical space. So we kind of need that. And I am saying that we do still need that. We need to birth a space that's unwavering, where we come together on a regular and consistent basis and have the Black Power roundtable. And so I'm offering that as an also a next step after this, offline, because, you know, y'all can't, you know, get the Facebook Live version of the plotting, but I'm just offering that as a means. And so we can build steps of consensus and points of agreement. And I'm down for that.
Yeah, you know, I just want to jump in. One of the things that Lamar said that I totally agree is the patience. One, we got to be patient with our own development. And we also got to be patient with our organization. But I also want to say that when we talk about this plan, who we planning with? Sometimes we talk about the plan, but I'm like, who we in the organization with? So sometimes we have a plan, but it's not a plan of the group because we're not part of the group. And if we say, well, we collectively, well, what is our collective agreement? What agreement that we collectively signed that this is what is consensus, this is what we gonna do collectively? Because sometimes we always holding people accountable to something that nobody agreed to be accountable for.
Right.
You know, so we hold people like, well, y'all organizers, so y'all accountable for what? I ain't agreed to your organizing skills or my organizing skills, but we should be in conversation. Organizers should be, if we have a common enemy, we have an obligation to be accountable to one another to work out a plan. But also the reality is that we all ain't gonna think the same way and do the same thing. I'm not necessarily trying to shut down the highway. I ain't got time to go run down, shut down the highway. But if somebody want to do it, then I was out there running this summer to make sure that folks that are shutting it down were safe. And I remember the first time they did it, I was cussing and did a live video. I said, if you're gonna organize, I was mad as hell. I said, if you're gonna organize, make sure people got water. Because that was for me, that's organizing one-on-one. But over the process, the person got it. We bonded, had a good relationship because I was like, I don't know who this person is shutting stuff down. But everybody has to learn. I think we do give space from some people to allow do something. But when you are doing stuff, I think what happens for us that's been here, when you're doing stuff or when somebody comes into the space and doing stuff that's actually destroying some stuff that's been built, then that's when people are like, well, what are you doing? Come, let's talk, because what you're doing is actually causing problems because we got this ship steered this way, and then you get ready to take us back the wrong direction. And you may not know that because you didn't jump in, you just jumped in. I think proper planning is needed, but I think it's also patient with this process, and it's also realizing all of us ain't gonna get together. But everybody has to come in where they come in, but knowing that everybody come in this process at different levels. I'm at my level of years, but I'm still learning, and we can all learn from one another. I just think that we got to have the patience with one another to see what's going to happen, to see what's going to work out. But some of the things that folks do, and we even notice internally, some folks don't agree with what we want to do. Even in the most radical movement, some folks, don't like what we do. So I think these conversations, like I said, is having around nationally. I don't think it's an intergenerational problem. I think it's a language barrier. And I say that is because back in the day, James Brown didn't say I'm black and I'm proud unless the movement was strong. We got to say in the hip hop caucus, when the movement is strong, the music is strong. When the movement is weak, the music is weak. When all this stuff started uprising, Black George Floyd, the music got stronger. Every time the movement happened, the music got stronger. And the artists were connected to the movement builder, so the music was strong. And I'm saying that we have to make sure that those that have done this are connected to those that want to do, and make sure you learn and have that time to sit down to ask the questions. And those that have been around say, oh, you got a Facebook, so all this information I can put on Facebook or I can put on Twitter. Well, show me how to do that and bridge the two, but not compete. And I think if we learn how to speak one another language, we can get it done. And it's been done, be very clear, it's been done across the country in a lot of different organizations. There's a lot of intergenerational elders are passing over the torch, let folks do, but sometimes we act like that's not being done across the country. It's been done lots of places, even here, where our younger generation will listen to the elders and taking that information and crafting and making their own and giving the spirit and energy that they have.
So TC, we got 10 minutes left. Dina, are you unmuted? Are you trying to say something? Because
Yeah, I do think we need to spend some time, and maybe we need to, as April said, we need to have this conversation a lot more, not always on a webinar, but we need to have the conversation and trying to figure out, just just sort of my own thinking through this, is that we have to figure out some processes and protocols. I don't like, but I think that structural issues are our problem. So I'm not an issues oriented person. If this is about this incident, or if this is about your job, or if this is about your child, to me, that's connected to a larger structural issue that's happening to a lot of people's jobs, a lot of people's children. And so that's my approach and my focus. And that's where I want to put my energy and my work. And so, so maybe we just need to get clear with each other about, where we do our work. Some people, it's the, immediate direct action stuff. That's important. It speaks to something that's going on right when it needs to happen. And as TC said, is, if people want to go do that, I don't have any problem with that. But if that's not my approach, I hope you don't have a problem with that either. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that we don't, get on a three-way call like we used to do when I was growing up, which is different from the from the newspaper and type letters and stuff. People get on social media right away emotionally and say things, and you can't unring that bell. And then we know too much about how people feel, because some people are posting how they feel every day, and it's creating a lot of resentment. And it's really become a way to disorganize, and it's really distracting. And then we start looking to see who's liking on that, because they sort of feel that way too. They liked a part of what was said, but nobody knows which part of it, the negative comment, And so it's real dangerous. It is, because it's people don't feel safe. And I don't mean physically safe and stuff. I'm just saying that it makes people question. Racism makes everything suspect, even our relationships. And so, anyway, I do think that we need to figure out, if there's something that your crew, your tribe, your base, your constituents, just who you flow with, if there's something that you want to move systemically in any organization, because I think there's so much focus on the police department, but Black and brown kids have been undereducated and ignored, for decades. And nobody is outraged about that at all, at all.
That's right.
We just sitting around, oh, somebody was murdered. Now that's tragic. But what's happening to our kids leads to an early death for them too.
Right.
And nobody's saying anything about it. So if you want to change the curriculum, if there are demands about how we're going to close the achievement gap, if we need to get more professional development around structural racism, whatever it is, whatever plan you have, let's talk. Let's talk about your approach. If you got a plan and stuff, let me know how I can help that. But I do hope that we can figure out if how we move things given our different approaches.
Yeah, and our ability.
I'm sorry, Monica. I just want to say thank you all. I'm going to jump off to another part of organizing of Blog Talk Radio, but I thank you all for the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I want to do as we start to close is I think maybe what Dina, the last words, Dina, Lamar, all of you have said, April and Kenya, is we've talked publicly, and hopefully in talking publicly, what we position is our willingness as generationally different or positioned people to try to have this conversation. It is not the first conversation, April, that any of us have had. Lamar, we've been at this. I mean, I've been in Greensboro for at least 2 decades. And I know that we've been back and forth. We've been in the room with our elders, Reverend Nelson Johnson, his wife, Reverend Joyce Johnson, Elder Brandon. We have been across our school system, our city council, and our county commission with a multiplicity of issues that are connected, even as we have to go to those different governing bodies separately. And we've had we've come together and had what might have felt like almost some small successes, but we've also driven some great big divides in methodology, approach. Who feels like we have to do? I think about the thing that was in my head, April, was, when you organized the morning drive. I mean, that was something we supported, but we didn't help you organize. But it was powerful to see you and Irving and others that had moved that all the way through. I thought the turnout was good. So there are going to be some individual ways that we're going to be organizing around issues that are really, really important. As a matter of fact, I think young people tend to put their bodies on the street differently than arthritic bodies can anymore. Y'all with me on that? Somebody out there saying amen, right? So you can't do at at 60 what you did at 30. And so we know that that natural order of things is passing that torch and that mantle, but we also got to talk a lot more. We got to spend a lot more time together. And we can't just come together in the urgency of the moment, of the issues that are driving us. We've got to start to have some, as you use the word, April, consensus, conversation, communication, however you want to deliver it. That
Can I
moves-
also offer, can I
Yeah,
also
please.
offer, Monica, that I would love, one of the next steps that I hope that we're consenting on, is to define what accountability looks like. Because, you know, I think that, you know, Black folks just deserve so much redemption. I think, you know, I'm glad for the graces of my community that I've experienced, but I don't want to cancel anybody. You know what I'm saying? I want us to be able to define, what does accountability mean like when you mess up? You know what I'm saying? Like we can't just throw each other you know, away. And so I really would like to define that going forward. What is accountability? What does accountability measure looks like? Is that person getting the resources? Do you need to go to therapy? Do you need to take a time out? You know what I'm saying? Can we give you some respite? That kind of thing. I really hope that we can collectively define.
Sure. Kenya or Lamar, because I'll start to talk about next week and we'll be closing out, but thoughts?
I'm grateful for a second chance to do this with y'all. And I'm always up for a difficult conversation. So
Grateful to have you here, Kenya.
And I'll tag team on that. Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I do welcome an offline conversation. I think it's important to really talk about, we can't come to consensus without having those conversations. And so April, I hope to reach out. I'll be reaching out to you soon, okay?
Of course, I appreciate that.
If Dina, I don't know if you want to say anything more. No?
No. You go
Well,
ahead and, close
let
this
let me say this. Next week, we're going to have actually two, part 1 and part 2, so that we have a group of organizers who are friends, who are organizing family, who are REI family. We've been invited to debut a film that was done on the educational struggle that manifests in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where in fact the achievement gap is defined by, I mean, Chapel Hill is probably one of the locations in the state of North Carolina that we said has some of the greatest resources in the state. But the achievement gap is so wide that it's one of the widest achievement gaps in the state of North Carolina. And that is the Chapel. Go ahead, Dina.
It's almost one of the largest ones in the country.
In the country. And so we're going to debut, number one, there is a filmmaker that has done a short documentary called I'm Smart Too, Kim Talikoff. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the company, but we're going to debut that documentary next week. We're going to talk about the relevance of that documentary and how it positions the educational struggle here in North Carolina. We're going to follow the next week. That's October 22nd. October 29th, we're going to have a group of leaders from North Carolina. We're going to have Stephanie Perry, Diane Jackson, and Anna Richards, Doreen Smith, Sarusi, and Wanda Hunter. They are people that have been organizing for at least a decade and have moved the needle with regard to, they call it a campaign for racial equity, but it is centered around the whole educational achievement gap in Chapel Hill. And so we're going to have a two-part experience of talking, number one, capturing that struggle in that documentary, and then talking with those organizers who we're very impressed with, stayed the course, focused strategically, specifically on education, didn't get sidetracked and distracted by other things, but knew that in order to move that needle with regard to addressing education, Dina even mentioned, I think in a previous episode, that they were so strategic that they managed to turn over the school board in the strategies that they employ. So for those of you that are educationally centered, concerned, we're going to invite you to be with us October 22nd and October 29th, where we're going to talk about what they did. And we found what they did measurably important for those of us that are invested in education. So I hope you'll come back, Dina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and that's maybe an example of what I'm talking about, because it was, Stephanie is, longtime strategic grassroots community organizer. Wanda is a white woman that's a former public health researcher, and they came together generationally. They came together across class and lines of profession and what people do, and they produced a report. They have a report on the achievement gap. And when I'm talking about, something concrete and tangible, that they worked really hard. Education was their focus. Monica talked about the attention that we take away from the work that we're doing, and we just can't get stuff done. And so we've brought them here to Greensboro before, invited the community at the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. Remember a couple of years ago, we invited them to come and talk about that process, that organizing process. So I'm really looking forward to it. That's all I wanted to add.
So we kept you a minute longer than we should have, but we're going to say goodnight and are hoping that you'll be back with us again next week, along with these young people will still be supporting, watching, participating. You never know where we're headed. So thank you and good night.
Thank you. Bye,
Thanks, Ron.
everyone.